Welcome to the Plant Trainers Podcast, where we're helping people improve their quality of life through nutrition and fitness. And now, your hosts, nutrition and wellness coaches, international speakers, Adam and Shoshana Chaim.
Hey, I'm Adam Chaim.
And I'm Shoshana Chaim, and we are
Propelled by Plants. Today we bring to you episode 458, Plant-Based Culinary School with Chef Stephanie.
In this episode of the Plant Trainers Podcast, we talk with Chef Stephanie White all about plant-based culinary school. Of course, we start out by asking her to share her plant-based journey, and we bet you won't guess how it began. Get what I did there? She shares her experience about being a vegan in a classical French program, and now she's paving the way for a different culinary world because there's plant-based culinary programs out there that are doing great things. We wouldn't resist talking to Chef Stephanie about pastries and croissants, and it made us so hungry.
Chef Stephanie is passionate about seasonal and plant-based eating, sustainable practices, food access, and education. With over a decade of professional experience, Stephanie has held various positions in many different establishments, including small businesses, pop-ups, high-end catering, high-volume cookery, and farm-to-table restaurants. She's played an integral role in the development and launch of the Auguste Escoffier School of Culinary Arts plant-based degree programs, and enjoys helping her students find their passion in the field and encouraging them to persevere. If you or anyone you know is looking for a plant-based culinary program, this one might be for you, and you're going to love the recipes we share.
Hey everyone, now it's more important than ever to stay close and connected to us as we're going to be making some changes here at Plant Trainers. So please head over to planttrainers.com and get our plant-based comfort foods recipe book for free. That's a $14.99 value just by signing up for our newsletter so that you can know what changes are, because we want to make sure that we stay in touch.
And now for a moment of gratitude.
Can I get two?
Two.
I'm grateful for this little puppy. Oh my God, what she's done for our family. She knows exactly what her job is. So that's awesome. But really what I'm grateful for is if you've been following us on my personal Facebook page, Shoshana Chaim, or on the Plant Trainers Instagram, you've noticed that our son had surgery last week. And I'm just so grateful that he's okay, but I'm grateful for the medical system that was able to diagnose him and do something about it in that emergency situation. But I'm also grateful for my molecules and my potions and my natural things that were able to help him with the pain so that he could take less pain meds and just get him back on his feet that much quicker to less inflammation, less pain, all of that. So I'm just super grateful for a respect in certain ways for both worlds.
So I'm grateful for Russ being okay, our son, and I was out of town when it happened and you had to take care of it and rush him for emergency surgery. So I'm grateful for you being able to do that and that it all turned out okay and he's recovering just beautifully.
And for this puppy. Dr. Chef Stephanie, thank you so much for being a guest on the Plant Trainers Podcast today.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. I'm so excited to be here.
We are excited to talk to you too. Apparently I have a puppy on my lap that's quite excited. It's quite excited as well. So while I get her settled, why don't you let us know if you have a moment of gratitude to share with us?
Yeah, I'm in the northern Kentucky area, kind of Cincinnati area, and typically this time of the year it's very gray. So honestly, I'm just grateful that there's blue skies and it's sunny. It's a beautiful thing.
It is a beautiful thing. And I think that helps people get outside. And especially for people living in the northern part of North America, that's really important this time of year to still get outside while there's actually light outside and keep your mental health as healthy as possible.
Absolutely. It's, I grew up on the East Coast, so I'm used to long, dark winters in many ways. But when I moved to the Cincinnati area 6 or 7 years ago, I was actually very taken aback by how gray it is. And I've had to be way more cognizant about taking time outside and really making sure that I get that sunshine. So it's super important to dial in on that. Absolutely.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you found plant-based and what it did for you?
Yeah, sure. So I actually went vegan off of a bet, which is mildly comical now, but I was 14 at the time. I went to a boarding school in Connecticut, and one of my teammates, we were training for ultimate frisbee for the spring season. We were like, what can we do to prepare better for the season? And for some reason, we got it in our head, like, hey, let's try going vegetarian to see if that helps our performance, that was not exactly like the norm thinking at the time. So it was very odd that we concluded that would help us. So we shook hands, we made a bet. And at the same time, though, I was really getting into looking at the food system and honestly getting quite mad at our standard American diet and the way we consume food as a society in the United States. So it kind of naturally leaned into veganism really quickly for me. I did notice that my performance, I felt like I was running faster. I felt better after eating. So it really did have that experience for me. But it co-founded with looking at sustainability and just feeling better about my decisions with my food choices. So that's how it started for me. I've always been a foodie in my life as well. My mother's a huge foodie. My grandmother grew raspberries, and I helped her harvest like walnuts and things like that growing up. She's a terrible cook, absolutely terrible. Like cooks zucchini until it's like mush and then puts margarine on it. Very post-depression era type of cooking. So not exactly the, haute cuisine that anybody wants to consume, but, as a kid, that's what you grow up with. But my mom is a fabulous cook, and she really sparked the passions I have for food and dining, and realizing that food is an amazing connector between human beings. So for me, I've always found that it's a really great way to connect with people on a very visceral level that you can't otherwise do in a lot of other ways. So I started getting into the culinary industry, working in, at the time, not many vegan restaurants out there. So I was working in a very, traditional kitchen. It was farm to table though. And they had many quirks about me being vegan at the time, but, I worked with what I had to because that was the world we were in. And it was still a phenomenal experience. Loved working with those cooks and chefs there. And then I found my way into culinary school. I went through a very traditional classical French-based culinary program, which I loved, but the veg forward trend was not there yet. So it was still very traditional. I knew that walking into it though. And I knew that I had to learn the techniques if I wanted to be a professional chef, and that was the way I could do it professionally and have the pedigree that people look at. So I worked off of sight, touch, and smell as a culinary student because I didn't want to consume animal products, but I had to work with them. And I remember at one point I told one of my chef instructors, I'm like, we should really focus on cooking more than just like steamed broccoli and like palm puree. That'd be great, wouldn't it? So it kind of, was a big reason why in the industry I felt it was important to help others experience really good plant-based food that didn't necessarily have to be like, it's vegan, like prompt it all that way. Just it's really good food. That's what it is. So for me, that's been kind of my undertone, but that was a very long-winded way of me introducing how I became vegan and how plant-based ended up in my life.
Yeah, a lot there. And I love how so many people have started on this vegan journey from a bet. And we talked to Daniel last week, and he was telling us about how he started running as a bet, and it led to him eating vegan. And it's just so funny that so many people start off this lifestyle as kind of a challenge or a bet, and it ends up being their life. They end up diving deep into it, and it really turns around their health. It turns around their fitness. It turns around their profession and really changes their entire lifestyle and quality of life along the way. So it's really cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think it's kind of funny too, thinking about the whole bet thing, because I think as humans, we probably aren't willing to make a bet that we aren't already leaning into. But it is the throttle that pushes us towards it. So I love hearing that other people are having a similar experience.
So did it change your athletic performance at that age? Were you able to notice that?
I personally felt that I was running better. I felt like my recovery was better. It could be psychosomatic, it's not like I was tracking it that well, but personally, I did feel that it did. So,
but it's common. Like it's if you speak to everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, but
right.
Almost everyone I've spoken to about how it affected their performance.
Mm-hmm.
It's recovery, it's quality, it's feel, it's
Mm-hmm.
the performance has improved tremendously, and the recovery has really made it that much easier to train harder and closer together. So it's common. I mean, the results are pretty seen across the board. Yeah. It's amazing.
I love that.
So once we saw someone who was plant-based on one of those like Master Chef shows, and she wouldn't eat it either. So talk to us a little bit about what was that experience like in terms of smelling, touching, feeling, and did the food like still turn out okay?
Yeah, it's when I first got accepted to the culinary school that I went to, I reached out to one of the chef instructors before I was officially a student. I got accepted. And I'm like, is this even possible? Because I morally, spiritually, I feel like that would be a compromisation for me to consume it. I know I have to work with it. I'm not at that. I was okay with that. But I got this email back from one of the chef instructors who then ended up becoming one of the chefs that I had in school. And I actually ended up working for him as a teaching assistant later on. And now we're friends. So it's been a beautiful friendship in a lot of ways and mentorship. But he emailed me back and he goes, it's not going to be easy, not whatsoever. But, think about somebody who has an allergy. They're not consuming the food either. It's understanding how to work with the product, understanding the foundational technique, what to look out for, and using your other senses. So he basically inspired me to say, what, let's try this out. And I will say not everybody was totally accepting of me being the vegan. That ended up being a nickname that I had at the time, which is fine. It wasn't inaccurate. A little weird because I'm like, that's your definitive characteristic on me, but that's okay. Most of the chefs were very understanding and were actually super excited to show me different dishes that we weren't necessarily covering in the curriculum. So that was really awesome as well. But I do remember getting on campus and I was trying to figure out where am I going to eat? Because everything that they're producing, I basically cannot eat. So where am I going to go to eat as a 17-year-old, 18-year-old? And I met with a dean, and that was one of the most difficult conversations I've had in my life, where they essentially told me that I was not going to become a good chef, let alone a good cook, being vegan. Now, this was 2010. So, it's been a while and I hope that they have a different perspective on it now. But, thinking back to that bet, I think that's also indicative of my strong will and maybe my tenacity that I was going to prove them wrong. So I started going through classes and candidly, the primary courses that were really difficult for me psychologically were the fish fabrication and meat fabrication courses we had at the beginning, which foundational information or foundational techniques that most chefs need to have if you're not in a plant-based track and plan to like have a completely plant-based restaurant and only work for plant-based. So I'm in these classes and I distinctly remember a chicken fabrication day, and I had worked with meat previously in the industry when I was a intern at that farm table restaurant. So I was kind of mentally prepared for that. But looking at a carcass, I had one of those out of body experiences where you're like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. And then, I kind of took a step back and I had to make peace with it for myself in a lot of ways. And at that point, I was like, you know what, I need to learn how to do this the best way possible to honor what has already happened and try to, celebrate the life that we have here. So for me, that was the way that I viewed it to help with the process. Now, I don't think everybody who's vegan or plant-based would have the same perspective on it, but that's the perspective that I had at that time. So hopefully that helps.
I think it does. So how did you help with the process now? Tell people what you're doing now.
Yeah. So now I'm working for the Auguste Escoffier School of Culinary Arts. They have a traditional culinary track, but we also have a beautiful culinary arts plant-based track as well, which is amazing because the whole thing is plant-based. So for those who are not willing to work with animal products, you don't have to in the program, which I think is amazing. And the whole point, though, is you're using those foundational techniques. We're at a point where all of those classical French techniques are being used, but in a plant-based light. So like PB101, which is the plant-based foundations part 1, you're still doing knife skills. You're still working on cooking methods and understanding the difference between blanching and shocking and what that does to nutrients and color on food versus roasting and what that does for the Maillard reaction caramelization. So still learning all the foundational principles that are pertinent in culinary arts, but using the medium of plant-based dishes. So that's a really beautiful thing for me personally, because I'm so excited that we have an accredited program that has really beautiful, bright, bold flavors that are just fundamentally plant-based and delicious. So it's an awesome program. Every program has things that we can do better. It's always an evolving process, but I'm really proud that we can offer something like this to people who want to be in the industry, but are, know exactly that they want to be in plant-based, or for those folks who maybe aren't fully plant-based themselves, but do want to provide those services for their customers. I'm so smitten that we have it.
It's pretty incredible. I mean, it's definitely, times have changed, and there's definitely more plant-based and vegan restaurants out there, and definitely more people want to be eating those foods. So it really makes sense that we have a culinary school that's offering that track, and congratulations on that, because that's super helpful.
Yeah.
Really
it's great. I was always hopeful, even as a culinary school student, and even as a vegan before that at some point we would be here. But and I had hoped, I think originally, that it would be even earlier. But at the same time, it is a good moment. There's so many people who have either been lifelong vegetarian vegans at this point, and there's a lot of people who, particularly because of the pandemic, are transitioning more towards plant-based. So I think it's a really great time that we have this to offer. Yeah.
We're just going to take a little break here because I want to share with you that growth is something that happens for everyone and every business. And we've been going through a lot of personal and professional growth here at Plant Trainers, and we want to stay connected with you. That's why we're giving away our plant-based comfort food ebook that's worth $14.99 for free at our website at planttrainers.com, or by clicking the link in the show notes. Click on that, get on our newsletter, because we're going to be making some serious changes and you need to be aware of what's going on. We look forward to connecting with you there. And now back to the show.
No, it definitely is. And I know that pastries is something that you enjoy working with. And I think that that's something that when people go plant-based or vegan, that they kind of think they have to give up because it's either too difficult or doesn't come out quite right. So why don't you talk us through some of the fundamentals in case anybody used to be a pastry lover and hasn't really been there lately and wants to go there and themselves. Yeah,
absolutely. So I love pastry work. I used to actually work for a vegan chocolate shop when I was in culinary school, which was always super fun. They're still thriving and doing an amazing job back in New York. But, when we think about baking, regardless of if it's plant-based or traditional, it's all based on chemistry and reactions that happen that, sometimes we can see, sometimes we can't. So honestly, the main thing that people need to consider is we have to measure everything way more than if you're making a stir fry, you can, work with feel, you can add some spices, you can have a lot more creativity. That's usually why, like, when we think of culinarians versus pastry chefs, we tend to have a different personality. I like the fact that I can kind of waver between the two, but when it comes to pastries, you have to be very, very precise, and you have to be very cognizant of temperatures and things like that. So I don't say that to scare people away, but it's very important that we measure things out. And when a recipe says 1 cup, usually I go for pastry recipes that are based on grams or by some other weight measurement, because it's so much more precise. Because think about it, like if you were to scoop a cup of whole wheat flour, if you pack it in there, it's gonna be a lot more flour than if you were to sift it and lightly put it in and then scrape off the top. Which means that you can either end up with a perfect cake or really dry cake, or something that you've overworked the flour into and developed too much gluten, and now it's rock hard. So there's a lot more folly when it comes to pastry work, but it can be incredibly rewarding if you're very meticulous. from the beginning and having all of your mise en place or all of your ingredients set in place and having your equipment ready to go. So that's my primary tip, is to be very particular about measuring everything out before you start adding stuff together, but also considering the oven temperature and, temperature of your room. So things like that can definitely help.
I think that we're both laughing in our head because our daughter had a sleepover last night. And when this particular child comes over, they always bake, and they're trying to find a vegan shortbread recipe.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going back and forth, and they're like, do we have almond flour? I'm like, no. They're like, it's okay, we'll just use the garbanzo bean flour. Do we have this? Or no, if we don't have enough, it's all right, we'll just put what we have, and we'll use flax instead of aquafaba. And I'm like, no. I'm like, you have to find a recipe that works with the ingredients we have in the house, because you're going to end up with a rock. Yeah,
absolutely. It's it's funny because when I first started baking, my grandmother also baked growing up, but very, cake box mixes and things like that. Like I can still taste the shortening on my tongue from her terrible buttercream. But it's just very visceral food memories, right? But, she always walked me through that process. So I kind of mentally figured out ratios. So sometimes I do bake by feel, but that's also after a lot of repetition and knowing what works and what doesn't work. I did certainly end up with terrible products sometimes too, and then I have to troubleshoot it as well. But yeah, I mean, switching out aquafaba for flaxseed meal or psyllium doesn't always work. It's very much a challenge. I honestly think in a lot of ways, plant-based pastry work can be more challenging, but it's also, I think, way more thrilling, particularly for those of us who miss having certain pastries, and really nailing it can, discern yourself compared to other people. So,
well, woke up this morning and on the counter, there's these little heart-shaped cookies that are frosted, and little people didn't try it yet, but it took them over 2 hours to put this together, because they had to put the batter together and then to put it in the fridge for an hour, and then they had to bake. It took so long. I'm like, can't you just find a recipe that's 10 minutes long and we can just eat it?
Did you look carefully at the teddy bear?
No, I did
not.
They
didn't just decorate his face.
I did not. I did not. Great.
Well, something to look forward to.
Amazing. Amazing. All that to say, is there a way though to make some type of cookie super quickly? Does it have to take hours to bake just because you're baking plant-based, or are there ways to do a quick kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we think about there are a lot of different types of cookies too. So if you're going for the type of cookie where you roll out and you cut into shapes and then you frost it, those will always take a ton of time, because you have to let the fat refirm up so that they don't lose their shape and things like that. That being said, drop cookies, think about a chocolate chip cookie. Those are way faster to produce, because essentially you're bringing the batter together, scooping it. You can't do that in advance too. So this is always kind of my hack with making any baked good, is I'll make a large batch of the batter, or whatever the case is. Doesn't always work for things like cakes, but cookies in particular, you can make a big batch, scoop it all out, portion out on a sheet tray with parchment paper, and then freeze them all. And that way you can pull them out as you want to bake them. So for me, it doesn't necessarily mean that the cookie's done in 10 minutes flat, but it does mean that if you want a cookie on the quick, if you've done that prep work, have it frozen, you can pull out a singular cookie and bake it off. I think that's my favorite thing about having cookies like that, is because then too, if you want to mix and match, if you want to look fancy and be like, I have these sugar cookies and I've got these chocolate chips and I've got some molasses, they're all done. They're just in the freezer. You just pop them out as people come over, and then you have fresh cookies.
And that's what we do with our grains and our beans. We make huge batches of grains and beans and freeze them in portions. Yeah,
exactly.
Smart. And what about croissants? Croissants are something that are just so delicious. We have one place where we can buy them nearby, but
they're hard to find without butter all over them, though.
Well, yeah. I mean, you're not going for health when you're going for croissant.
No, but I'm talking even vegan butter. It's hard to find a plant-based croissant unless you have a vegan specific place to go.
Yeah. Croissant. I love a good croissant, particularly pain au chocolat. But that being said, it's really tricky to find on the market plant-based fully. I will say it's not something you can do in 10 minutes. There will never be a quick, fast, easy croissant. Unfortunately, that's not the case. But a lot of traditional croissant recipes can be made plant-based. Typically what we're switching out, usually there's a little bit of milk, so we do plant-based milk instead, and then obviously copious amounts of butter. Luckily, the plant-based butters that are on the market these days have a lot more resilience and plasticity. So I think of like the brand Flora. I really like working with them for French pastry techniques because it tends to manipulate and work very similarly to dairy versus, there are other brands out there. And there's some amazing brands out there now that weren't on the market even 5-6 years ago. So there's a lot more ability to make those products at home with much more success. And I think, long-term, like I think I must have been 18 or 19 at the time. I'm like, I'm going to make vegan croissants. It's going to be amazing. It's, this is my weird thought after a long shift. And I was trying to make essentially a plant-based butter using coconut oil and some lecithin, and it was not a success. Coconut oil melts too quickly, so you don't get those beautiful little pockets. I was also impatient because croissants are a labor of love. You have to make the dough first, and then you have to, build out the block of plant-based butter, and you have to put the dough around the butter, and then you have to chill it, and you roll it out, and you fold it again, and chill it. It's this whole process. That being said, you can do other things while you're doing it. So while it's chilling, go for a walk, hang out with your loved ones. There are things you can do to make it not feel like, wow, I just spent my whole day making croissants. I mean, some people love that, but not everybody wants to spend their whole day doing that.
I just want to eat them.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Adam and I did some traveling in Italy this summer. And so if anybody's traveling to Italy, there was this theme of all of the turmeric croissants were naturally plant-based, like they were, or vegan, I should say, and there was no dairy, there was no egg, there was nothing in them. Do you know why?
That's really interesting. Off the top of my head, I don't. It could be that area was just using shortening, which, shortening has been used in traditional baking for a very long time, which lends itself naturally to veganism. I personally, I don't like the mouthfeel of shortening. It's slick. It's just a weird idiosyncrasy I think I have, but it could be that. Yeah. Otherwise I'd have to do some research, which I'd be happy to do, but my guess is probably that.
Super interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if anybody's interested in the plant-based culinary school or what did you call it? Culinary line?
Yeah. So basically it's the plant-based culinary arts diploma. We have the diploma and associates track. So, yeah. So
tell them where they would go to find out a little bit more about that or find out a little bit more about you.
Yeah, absolutely. So our website is escoffier.edu. So that's ESCOFFIER.edu. My contact information is on the website under chef instructors. Happy to talk with anybody at any point in time. But anybody can explore our programs there. I believe our Instagram is Escoffier Schools. And then our Twitter is Escoffier School. But honestly, if you type out Auguste Escoffier on Google, you'll be able to find our info.
And is it an in-person only school or can they do it online?
No, it's a beautiful thing. We have a campus in Boulder, Colorado, and a campus in Austin, Texas. Currently, the Boulder campus is the one that offers a plant-based track on site, but we have an amazing online program. So most of our students are actually online. So it's really cool. It's definitely not traditional, but I think we're really good at breaking traditional norms, which is one of the reasons why I love working for Escoffier. So you can take the whole program online. So if you're living in California, if you're living in Shanghai, you can take it. Yeah.
Amazing. Chef Stephanie, thank you so much for being here on the Plant Trainers podcast with us.
Oh, it's been such a pleasure. Thanks for having me and spending some time talking about plant-based.
Yeah, I'm hungry for croissants now, and we will link to all of those things that you talked about at planttrainers.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much for listening to this edition of the Plant Trainers podcast. We want to make sure that you subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or any other podcasting platform.
We really appreciate the feedback we receive from you. Every time we get a 5-star rating or review on iTunes from one of our fans, it really helps other people find us, just like you did.
Thanks so much to our patrons. To become a patron, visit us at patreon.com/planttrainers. Even supporting us with $1 really makes a difference in the quality of the show.
And don't forget to connect with us on Instagram and Twitter. Our handle is @PlantTrainers. Like Plant Trainers on Facebook, join our newsletter, and check out our website at planttrainers.com for awesome recipes, a list of our services, and of course, our latest podcast.
We encourage you to email your questions to info@planttrainers.com so that we can help you improve your quality of life through nutrition and fitness.
So we hope we've inspired you today. Join us again next time and have a healthy day. Or is that too corny?
It's a little cheesy.